It's a conversation with Chief Sam Dotson. I'm Debbie Monterrey, and St. Louis Police Chief Sam Dotson, welcome.
How are you today?
It has been a year, more than a year on the job for you as St. Louis Police Chief. Time has flown.
It really has. It was January 1st of 2013, and we got a chance to do some good things in the department, and I think we're having some success.
Well, we have a lot of topics to get to today, but let's just start off for those who haven't really had a chance to get to know Sam Dotson yet. I'm sure things have changed a lot for you over this past year with time and the things you're able to do, but what does Police Chief Sam Dotson do when he's not at the police department?
Well, those times aren't very often. I love my job and I enjoy doing it, but it's a big commitment. I'm a little bit of a foodie. I like restaurants. So whether it's somewhere on the hill, I got some favorite restaurants there, somewhere downtown. I enjoy that, just relaxing, having a meal, because during the day we don't eat very well. And I don't get to go to the gym very well, so I got to watch what I eat a little bit.
Absolutely. You talked about the things that have happened over the course of the year. Let's start with some of the good things. What would you say have been some of the happy surprises or some of the accomplishments over the past year?
Well, the big one was, and we just kicked it off at the end of January, was redistricting. For many years, actually going back to 1962, the city of St. Louis was divided into 9 police districts. It worked well, and as we had a population of 750, 800,000 people. But as populations declined over time, that district configuration kind of got out of balance. And so when we took over in January of last year, we looked at the data and said, how can we deliver police services better to the community? How can we be more responsive to do things like hotspot policing? So on a data-driven model, we redistrict. We drew 6 districts in the city, and each district has the same amount of calls from 911, the same amount of crime, and the same amount of police officers. So that way we can police the entire city the same way. That's a big deal, because you've heard us talk about hotspot policing. Hotspot policing really does work. Putting resources into the neighborhoods or the blocks, and there's hotspot policing and microspot policing, putting them into the areas that are challenged, that have the issues, really does make an impact. We saw it in the College Hill neighborhood last year. We've been in Lewis Place, Fountain Park, some of the Shaw neighborhood. We've done a lot of good things over the years. So I'm very happy with our redistricting, very happy with hotspot policing and our ability to push down crime. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Well, talking about hotspot policing, I know it has shown some successes, and some people say, well, College Park, for example, you hotspot police, but then you leave. So what keeps the crime from coming back after the police stop hotspot policing?
There's a maintenance program that goes along with it. So the first phase of hotspot policing is to go and do that enforcement piece. And so when we saw the increase in violence in College Hill last year, we sent resources in, and immediately, over a 2-week period, crime went down 85%, arrested some number of people and took some number of guns off the street. The second part of hotspot policing, I'm a big believer in the broken windows theory, that if a neighborhood shows signs of deterioration, if a neighborhood appears that the residents don't care, criminals feel comfortable to operate in that neighborhood. So hotspot 2, the second phase of hotspot policing, we take the building division, the parks department, forestry, the street department, the health department, and we go in and we cut vacant lots. We board up buildings. We make sure all the street lights work. The health department goes and talks to people about the dangers of lead paint, lead contamination in children. So we leave the neighborhood a little bit better than when we started and when we found it. In the College Hill neighborhood, at the end of last year, was down almost 40% in crime. So there is a lasting residual impact. So criminals are opportunistic. If you take away their opportunity, if you incarcerate the people that are responsible for the crime, not always does somebody pop up and take their place.
So going from College Park neighborhood to Tower Grove South, which is my neighborhood, I know when it was announced there'd be hotspot policing in that neighborhood, a lot of people were thinking, what, do we have a huge crime problem? Why are they focusing on this neighborhood now?
And what we look at is, when we look at issues around the city, there's violent crime, there's property crime, and we saw in those areas an increase in stolen autos and larcenies. So police agencies around the country have different tactics that they can use to address different crimes. You don't police for aggravated assaults the same way you do for burglaries or robberies or larcenies. And so there was a hot spot in that neighborhood, not your block, but in that neighborhood. And so we put resources in there. And we do that, part of the redistricting plan was to give each captain, and there are 6 district captains, each of those districts, additional resources to go in and do hotspot policing. So police departments work on a theory of a third, a third, and a third. A third of our time is spent answering 911 calls. So when someone calls 911, a third of the time a police officer, a third of their time spends answering those calls. The second third is the third where we arrest individuals, write police reports, do administrative work, continuing training, kind of the administrative piece of the business. The last third is the important part. That's what we call self-initiated activity. It's allowing the officers to get out of the car and walk foot beats, do pedestrian checks, check on businesses, pull cars over. That's the third where you get the crime reduction. When we redistrict, we gave each captain resources to be able to do that, hotspot police on a regular basis, whether it's in your neighborhood, my neighborhood, any neighborhood. Each captain has the ability to do that now.
And I would imagine that most citizens would like that third component, because it seems like some of the disconnect between citizens and the police department may be that people don't necessarily have that one-on-one connection anymore with that beat cop they were used to seeing walking the street when they were kids.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the programs that we have for the recruits when they graduate from our police academy, in their first 3-month period as they're learning the job, we require them to spend 30 days walking a foot beat. So it kind of indoctrinates them into the culture, puts them in contact with the public, gives them a taste of really what community policing is about. So it is a big part of what we do, is that self-initiated piece.
Now, as far as the redistricting goes, is there anything that citizens need to know about this? Is there any way that it would impact, an individual citizen? Are there different places they should call, or will things just be seamless and no one should really notice a difference?
Well, the good news is this happened on January 27th, and it has been seamless and it has been transparent. It's one thing as we got ready for it to look at the data and say we think this is going to happen. We've got over 2 months of data now, and looking at the data, we accomplished what we'd hoped for. So now, the weather's been cold, and so I'm going to reserve a judgment about the crime reduction piece of it, but crime in the city of St. Louis right now is down 20%. So we've seen a reduction last year, the year before, and right now for the first couple of months of this year, we're down. For people in the community, it's seamless, it's transparent. You still call 911. There are still 3 super stations throughout the city, one on Sublet, one at Dr. King and Jefferson, and the other on Union. Instead of 3 districts operating out of each one, now 2 districts operate out of each one. And what I've heard more times than not is, as I go to neighborhood meetings, and we go to a lot of meetings in the neighborhood, as I go to neighborhood meetings, they're saying that, hey, I'm seeing more police officers, I'm seeing more cars patrolling. That's a good thing. That's what we hoped would happen. And so as we get into the summer months and the busier time, we'll see if we're going to be able to have an impact on crime like I hope we do.
And as you mentioned, the crime numbers have been down, and it could be because we've had a really lousy winter that keeps people inside. But when we talk about crime statistics for St. Louis, there's sort of 2 schools of thought, because we often land on these lists of having, we're the most dangerous place in America, or we have these really high statistics, which may or may not be representative of what's really happening. What do you think about these lists we end up on, and are they fair?
Well, absolutely, they're not fair. So let's start with context. Let's start with the reality. Crime in the city of St. Louis is down 50% since 2006. Crime in the city of St. Louis is at the lowest levels since the 1970s. Actually, 1970. What that tells me is our strategies are working, or having an impact. Some people will say, well, sure, there were more people in the city of St. Louis in 1970 than there are today, about 700,000 compared to 320,000, so you should have less crime. Not only do we look at the total number of crimes that occur, we look at the crimes that happen per 1,000 people. So kind of an apples-to-apples comparison. There are fewer crimes occurring now in the city of St. Louis than there were in 1970. That's not always reported in this 24-hour news cycle that we're in, where they use sensational headlines to try and catch people's attention. The crime that does occur gets sensationalized. There were fewer crimes last year, than the year before, going all the way back to 2006, a 50% decrease. So we are making progress. When we look at crime, though, we just can't look at crime as just the city of St. Louis. We have to look at crime as a region. And I'll kind of give you some examples and follow this through. We live in the city of St. Louis. You and I both live in the city of St. Louis. On occasion, we may go to the Galleria Mall or the West County Mall. We may see a movie, have dinner in the county. People that live in the county certainly come to the city to go to a baseball game, a football game, a hockey game. So we have a regional community. We go back and forth. Criminals do the same thing. Criminals that live in St. Louis County, believe it or not, may come to the city and offend, and criminals that live in the city can offend in the city, can offend in the county. So when we look at crime statistics just for St. Louis, it only takes in that 62 square miles, which is the urban core. When you look around the country, a lot of cities have combined their cities and counties, Indianapolis, Charlotte, Mecklenburg. But let's just take Kansas City on the other side of the state as an example. St. Louis City, 62 square miles. The Kansas City area is over 320 square miles. Includes the urban core, suburban, and rural to offset the crime statistics that they have. St. Louis County, the former chief in St. Louis County, Tim Fitch, and I said, hey, why can't we do that in St. Louis? Why can't we look at crime as a regional problem? Because we share resources, and I think we'll talk about that too. But crime, we know, goes back and forth. So we've asked the FBI to consider looking at St. Louis as one and not as 6. Do you know how many police agencies there are in the city, in the area around St. Louis?
A lot.
There are over 60. So instead of having 60 individual police departments in Ladue and Frontenac and Creve Coeur and everywhere, let's look at crime as a regional problem, which it really is, and combine all those statistics. If you take the crime that occurred in St. Louis City and add it with the crime that occurred just in unincorporated St. Louis County, we go from that top tier, that 2, 3, 4 city that you talked about, the most dangerous cities, we drop to somewhere around 40. I can tell you who the top 5 are and probably the top 10. Once you get past 20, I can't tell you who those cities are. If we take the whole region, we go to about 141st. So that's the reality when you compare apples to apples, St. Louis to other parts of the country. And people say, well, you're trying to manipulate the crime numbers. We're not manipulating the crime numbers. We still report our crime numbers one for one as they happen, so would St. Louis County. But here's why it's important, economics. When companies look to bring jobs, to relocate, to start a business, they look at a variety of factors. They look at cost of living, they look at tax base, they look at infrastructure, they look at schools, they look at crime. Wells Fargo Advisors, just as an example, in the last couple of years brought 800 families from Charlotte-Mecklenburg to St. Louis, 800 jobs. The number one hurdle they had to get over was the city is not safe because of those rankings. So if we want to really grow the region, grow the city, we need jobs. If you want better schools, you need the economics behind it, the tax base, infrastructure, all of those things. That's why this conversation is so important.
Well, we certainly can talk more about working as a region, and we have many more topics to get to, but we are going to take a quick break here. It's a conversation with Police Chief Sam Dotson.
The odds of this daughter of a clergyman spending 11 weeks at #1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org.
Hi, my name's CJ. A few years ago, my father became seriously ill. I did what I could do before he passed, but it took its toll. I lost my job, my house. I'm getting back on my feet, but I don't know when there'll be food on the table. How'd I do, CJ?
We could be twins.
Well, cousins, maybe.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Individuals arrested, they get probation. They're arrested again, they get probation. While they're in double secret probation, it happens 3 more times. So you think at some point somebody would say probation probably isn't going to work for this individual. But I make light of it, but if the system had worked the first time, 4 fewer people would have been victimized. That's why the things like Mayor Slay talked about, the armed offender docket in the courts in the city of St. Louis, a specific path for individuals that we arrest with, for unlawful use of a weapon and robbery first, to have 2 judges to hold those individuals accountable, to have a real outcome in the sentencing of those individuals. The courts rejected that plan, and we'll go to Jefferson City and talk about it and ask the legislature to help us. But they would have engaged the gentleman that shot at the police officer on Saturday and perhaps kept that police officer from being shot if we would have had real outcomes for individuals. He was on probation for robbery.
Our conversation with Chief Sam Dotson continues, and Chief, that's probably an aspect that a lot of people don't consider. That, you know, they'll say, why don't the police do something about this crime? And you have officers who are showing up to the scene of crimes and they're arresting the same person over and over again. It's like, oh, hey, it's Joe again.
Well, I think you hit it exactly the nail on the head there. The St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department arrests between 27 and 30,000 people a year. That's a huge number. But what we see in that is that we have repeat customers, frequent flyers, people that we arrest. And so when I go around to neighborhood groups and I'm out in the community, I talk about a couple of things, and the neighborhood ownership model is one of them. The neighborhood ownership model is a partnership between the police department, the circuit attorney's office, the mayor's office, and the community. And what it really does, it does 2 things, and I like them both, but I like the second piece a little bit better. The first piece is it organizes neighborhood watches. Nobody knows your neighborhood better than you do. What feels right, what doesn't look right. We were kind of talking before. If you ever have a question about should I call 911 or not, always err on the side of caution. That's why we're there. Always call us. But you know best what's going on in your neighborhood. So you are eyes and ears for us. The second piece, and I think that clip kind of talked about it, was that we don't always get the outcomes in the court system that keep the community safe. There's quite often that individuals that we arrest get probation. Recidivism rate, the rate at which people reoffend, is as high as 70% sometimes in the city of St. Louis. Probation doesn't work for everyone. There has to be consequences. There are outcomes that keep the community safe. We organize neighborhoods not only to do citizens on patrol, but to go and sit in a courtroom. And let's say Sam Dotson was terrorizing some neighborhood and Sam Dotson is on trial. Found guilty after his due process, the neighborhood needs to be there and say, hey, judge, we want your attention. We want to know that this person victimized our friends, our families, and we want to do something about it. So that's why we have to get people more involved in the system, because it's not about arresting people. Incarceration isn't the answer. If you arrest someone and they're released back into society at the same exact place that they were, that's why people reoffend at as high as 70%. We have to have some meaningful interventions in their lives. Drug programs, education programs, job skill programs. We do an example of that with our Police Athletic League. Police officers work with young kids and young men and young women in sports programs. But before they can participate in some of the sports programs, they have to have life skill classes, work towards their GED. How do you dress for an interview? How do you interview when you go on a job interview to get the job? So all of those things have to be put together. Police do a great job. The St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department does a fantastic job. We need the rest of the system to engage the same way.
Now, I know there have been some heated words from the mayor and words from yourself as well to judges in the city about being tougher on the people who are coming before them. Do you think that a drug court is a good idea? Do you think that this idea of gun crimes moving to the front of the line, is that a good idea? Because I know that a lot of parolees and people on probation, they don't seem to mind that, they're not supposed to have a gun, but yet they do. So, just telling them not to have one, I'm sure your officers are finding people every day who shouldn't have them, and they do.
I think we have to look at the systemic causes and the root causes of why people commit crimes. Substance abuse, the drug courts that you talked about, I think is a great one. The drug courts do something to change that person's life, whether it's help with the substance abuse, whether it's counseling, whether it's job skills. That program really brings social services to bear on that individual. They work. I like that. The gun court, the mayor, the circuit attorney, myself, Dan Isom, the former chief, Rick Rosenfeld from UMSL, we all thought that gun crimes are so prevalent, the criminals possess guns so often illegally, that we needed to have real outcomes around 2 crimes: unlawful use of a weapon and robbery first, where a gun is used to take something from your person forcefully. The courts disagreed with us and did something that I described as a little more as window dressing. We haven't seen a change in the outcomes from the court yet.
Okay, so it wasn't the gun court that you had been advocating, but something the judges felt they could live with.
Something the judges felt they could live with that I described as nothing more than window dressing.
Let's go back to this neighborhood model that you're talking about, because people do need to take ownership in their neighborhoods, obviously. And I know that there have been neighborhood patrols, and the police have been very active helping neighborhoods to set those up. Are those helpful as far as you're concerned? Can neighbors catch these things? Is it helping to fight some of those things that are happening? And what would be your advice to a neighborhood that maybe hasn't done that yet?
Absolutely to everything that you just said. We have a unit that we call the neighborhood ownership model in the police department, and I have a sergeant that's dedicated full-time to going around neighborhoods throughout the city and organizing those neighborhoods to do just the things we talked about: citizens on patrol, court watch. We talked about the broken window theory in the earlier segment. That's a sign to criminals that this neighborhood cares, they're engaged, whether it's signs on the block that say patrolled by Neighborhood Watch, whether it's seeing people go to court and we've seen t-shirts and hats where they're readily identifiable. Those are all things that the community can do to help us. And then the other is anything that you see in your neighborhood, call us, that's what we do. Or if you have information about a crime, there are many sources, Crime Stoppers, for example, where you can supply a tip anonymously, or they even offer rewards. You can certainly call us, send us a letter, send us an email. If you have any information about crimes that are occurring, we want to take that information in any way that we can get it.
Now, you mentioned officers working with young people in sports and kind of helping set them on the right path. But that is a big challenge, isn't it? Because we have a lot of kids in the city of St. Louis who are growing up with parents or a parent who maybe is not the best role model, kids growing up not getting that kind of structure that they really need to. We also have issues of mental illness, aside from the drug abuse that we were talking about. So how do you address those things with limited resources? Because those are both big issues.
Let's start with the mental health and kind of work backwards from there. Many of the people that we arrest or we find have mental health issues, whether they're created from substance abuse, drug abuse, lack of availability to health care, medicine. And so the criminal justice system and the police officers are not the right place for those people to be. Unfortunately, with the structure that we're in, with cutbacks in a variety of medical programs, we are the police officers, are the service providers of first and last resort sometimes. Not the right place. You know, we train our officers in a program on how to identify mental illness to try and help with referrals. But again, we come to a point where if all other parts of the system fail, if mental health is underfunded, if medical doctors are underfunded, we're there when nobody else is in the middle of the night when you call 911. So we are partnered with groups that advocate for mental illness to try and change that, continually educate our officers. Going to the kids, those are the systemic issues that face not only St. Louis, but any urban area. Single-parent families, families where multiple people are incarcerated, lack of quality education, underemployment. Again, those are all things that are a little bit outside of the realm of law enforcement, but there's nobody at 10 o'clock at night when you call the police to say, hey, I got a job for you. Or there aren't any GED programs on Saturday when kids get into trouble. We need community to step up and really fill those needs because we know incarceration is not the right answer.
Now, we know that in the media, stories about when police do something wrong, if they arrest the wrong person, if there's abuse, anything bad about the police department is obviously very well publicized, and it may tend to give people the idea that perhaps the police are not on the up and up. But you know, there's going to be problems in any organization. But how does that affect your officers, do you think? Or how does that affect you as the chief when there's a perception? Any
organization that you go to, there's some number, some percentage of people that don't do the job the way that you want them. Police officers are held to, I hold them, and the department holds them to a much higher standard. So our expectations are a lot higher. People want to talk about, well, the police department did this or the police department did that. We fired in the last 2 years almost 30 people because of misconduct, because of their behaviors, things that weren't the way that the department wanted. So we do a very good job of policing ourselves. Anybody that has a concern or a complaint about the way that they were treated by the officers, the way their incident was handled, can certainly come to the Internal Affairs Division. They can go to one of the area stations and make a complaint or tell us about it. We're always interested in that. We always want that feedback. But for the officers, the 99.99% that are out there every day doing a good job, it's incredibly demotivational, demoralizing when, you know, we ask them to do a dangerous job. That's probably the one thing I didn't anticipate about being chief is the emotion that goes along with the job. We ask them to go out in the middle of the night to chase sometimes young people that are armed with guns down alleys in the dark of night, It's a dangerous job. And then we hold them to a higher standard and criticize them for when they make a mistake. Absolutely, they should be held accountable for it, but we also have to have the context that they're doing a very dangerous job. They make split-second decisions, and then they have to live with it for the rest of their lives.
Now, the budget of the police department is always something that is at issue, and I'm sure there's never enough money to do all the things that you would like to do, but how is that situation, and how has that played out for you in your first year?
Well, this is the first budget cycle that we're under local control. As you know, last year on September 1st, we transitioned from state control to local control. So this is our first budget cycle under local control. It's challenging, but it's not challenging for any other reason except times still haven't recovered. Times are difficult. And the street department competes for money with us to pave streets and make sure the street lights work. The parks department competes with us to make sure that there are recreational opportunities for kids. So it's all a prioritization. So I think the city's done a great job with what they have. I would always like more, just for the record. If anybody's got an extra $5 laying around, I'll take it. But I think the city has done a good job. We are trying to add some police officers into the budget for the upcoming year. We apply for every federal grant that we see that fits into what we're doing, whether it's hotspot policing, officers, overtime equipment. We're always looking for opportunities like that. So again, local control has been good for the police department, seamless, no problems, but this is the first budget cycle.
Well, before we have to go, I want to ask you, looking ahead, now we've talked about your first year as Chief of Police here in St. Louis City. What would Sam Dotson like to see happen maybe in the next couple of years, next 5 years? And if you had your crystal ball and you could, wave your wand and make anything happen, what would that be?
I think there are a couple of things. I think the first one is this conversation about combining crime statistics with St. Louis County is an important one, not just for the city, for the region. If we want to compete with Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Indianapolis, a variety of places around the country, we have to be on equal playing surfaces. That brings jobs, convention, tourism, all of those things. I want to continue the joint ventures that we have with St. Louis County. We fly a helicopter together to share the cost. We ride Metrolink together to do joint enforcement. Our bombing and arson units work together. We're talking about cross-deputization between city and county officers so we can really approach crime as a regional issue. So I think that's an important one. And then I'd like to continue to see this decrease in crime. I push the officers every day. They do a great job, a fantastic job. I want to support them, and ultimately we'll talk about the budget. I think they deserve a raise at some point.
Yeah, it's a hard job to go out and do for not much money. Well, congratulations on your first year on the job, and I appreciate you joining us here today to have a conversation with Police Chief Sam Dotson. I'm sure we'll have many more in the years to come.
Thank you.
I'm Debbie Monterrey. It's a conversation with Police Chief Sam Dotson.